Change as movement. Wait for it.
Wow.
And I'm going now. That's the whole presentation. So, oh, I can't see because of all your beautiful faces. So a little about me. Graduated from University of Pennsylvania with my MSW in 2017. I'm an LSW, which just means I took another test to be licensed. I'm a first-year PhD student at the School of Social Work. Yay! And 10 years of experience primarily in mental health, trauma, addiction, and intimate partner violence. So I came to grad school with some robust kind of field work for myself before starting my program. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Eastern Caribbean, and I'm a dog mom. Very important.
Very, very important.
Most important thing I do. I want to start with orienting you in some of the models of change often seen in social work. After that, we're going to talk about my personal philosophy around change, which is both influenced by, but not solitarily found in the frameworks of social work. We're going to then do a little experiential activity. We may, if we have time, which we probably won't because that's how it always works, do a breakout room, and then we'll sort of report out, ask questions, all that good stuff. This is a full slide. Don't be overwhelmed. And before I start, I want to say too that it's not my 100% preference to talk at you for a long time, but I want to give you some scaffolding before we talk about what my idea of change is. And so I'm going to have to do it in this style just because I want to orient you. But that doesn't mean that I want you to sit there silently and or bored. So like, I take no offense. Like if I'm boring you, like, please tell me. Or if you want to know, like, why does that matter? Tell me why this matters about change. Say that. Like, this is not for me to hear my own voice. I just want to orient you. So please, please, please feel I'm inviting you to have the freedom to use your voice and to, stop me, pause me, say whatever you like. I see the chat, but I can't see the chat. So Kelly, let me know if I have to see anything in there. All right, thumbs up.
Thumbs up.
Everyone understand? Cool. I'm not holding you hostage with this lecture. That's what I want you to understand. Okay, so this is a full slide. And I just want you to you can just scan it and see what words sort of pop out at you. Anyone want to let's take 3. Just yell one word that sticks out to you as you scan.
Teacher.
Yeah. 2 more.
Championing.
Championing, yes. Advocating, big for social work.
Listener.
Listener, yes. Let's do one more because this is fun.
Empathy.
Empathy, yes. So as we ground ourselves in this idea of change, we also have to ground ourselves in this idea of what it is to be a social worker. So I think I put here, it's probably easier to say what social workers are not, because they're really, it's a very all-encompassing, large sort of net that you're throwing for social work. So we're in a lot of different arenas, from micro to macro work, from individual work to organizations, to case management, to therapy, to adults, to children, to in all sort of populations you can find social workers. But the big things I want to pull from this is really exactly what you just did with your words, which is the empathy is really important. Non-judgmental empathy, very important. You'll see here strength focus. So it's a big thing for social work. We're strength-based over deficit thinking. You're starting where the person is, and you also really focusing on self-determination. Whereas I'm not here to tell you what to do or to fix you because I don't think you're broken. I'm here to assist. and guide. So that can be a little different from other disciplines, which is why I want to highlight it. That's a big value for social workers is, you know, we're partnering. We're not dictating. Okay, so here we go. I keep having to move your little faces. So some models of change. These are 4 of the 8,152 social work theories of change that exist. So I want to say that there are many theories of change. There are many frameworks. There are many ways to look at change, define change, and address change from a social work lens. These are 4 that I really just picked because I think you'll enjoy them, and they come with great visuals. And I myself am a visual learner.
Ties to what we were talking about earlier. Yeah. So already saw represented some of the things we were discussing.
Oh, cool. So I want to start here with stages of change. First one here, so there's 5 sections. First one's contemplation, where you are unaware of the problem. We just heard contemplation, where you're aware of the problem and of the desired behavior change, but nothing else is really happening yet. You're just like, maybe I should work on that. Preparation, anyone?
Intends to take action.
Right, cool. Action.
Practices the desired behavior.
Yes, and maintenance.
Works to sustain the behavior change.
Thank you so much. So this model in particular is one that you are going to see really often, probably like in addiction treatment. It's one of those terms and languages that we use a lot in order to try and quantify, you know, where someone might be in their change process, because addiction is one of those things that is so largely about changing a behavior, right? A complex reasons why the behavior exists, and a behavior that ultimately it's, you know, someone's making that choice and doing that behavior, even though it hurts themselves, right? And a lot of times they know that and they're making the choice anyway. So a lot of my background is in that field. So I find that task really fascinating, right? And it's not just addiction, because all of us, I'm 100% sure, can think about a choice that we make that harms us in some way that we consciously choose. So this idea of where we sit in the arc of behavior change is really what is at the core of this model. And I think it's really important to note that sometimes when stages of change is talked about, it's linear, as you're seeing here, and sometimes it's circular. Now, as a social worker, and just my personal style, I like the circle. You know, I think it's more inclusive. I think that it's more that idea of going around and maybe going back, and you're moving back and forth, is really important, because if you think about self-compassion, like the next slide here, we'll see that includes the word relapse. Again, relapse doesn't have to signify addiction, but it can. But it could be anything, right? It could be any behavior you're trying to make. If you're trying to work on your anger, and you know you're doing all these things and you're implementing all these skills, and then one day you have like this big outburst with your loved one, that could falling back into the old pattern of behavior. And it's very important from a social work perspective not to go into a place of shame or self-blame, or, you know, lack of self-compassion, or, you know, but to come from a place of relapse is part of recovery. And that's something you'll hear in treatment a lot, but again, could apply to anything. Relapse is part of recovery. We're not perfect. We're not going to get it perfect. The thing we want to have the, you know, champion, the word someone chose, is that we're in the process, which should make someone feel proud, hopefully, and empowered. So we see it here in a circular fashion.
Christina, I'm just going to jump in for a minute. I put it in the chat, but it's interesting right here. Thinking about these concepts from social work and what applicability they have for the field of education. So thinking about this concept of relapse, right? Is there an ancillary, is there, you know, something in education or in the process of learning and development and self-actualization that would be akin to relapse, right? So this is where we're thinking about what is the applicability of these theories in other disciplines for a discipline that is a close cousin, of course, right? There's kinship there, and there's a reason why, for example, social work and education are often not too far away, thinking of them as the healing arts, which was we were framing them before. But just as Christina's talking, what are the things that you can pull that might be applicable to your own emergent theories of change as we're moving forward?
Yes, and please too, like I said earlier, as we go through, even though I'm working from a PowerPoint, please feel free to jot down things that feel relevant to you, or things that feel like Kelly just said, to your idea of change, but also like to your life. If you're like, ooh, that I felt that, like, right, jot that down. And I just want to point out too, before we move to the next model of change, that this jump from preparation to action is really crucial, and it's one that really like I would say most in the 10 years I've been working directly with individuals, this is the cliff that's most hard to hop over. Like, this is the hurdle, because change, and this goes into my personal idea of change for me, my philosophy doesn't happen in the theoretical, it happens in the experiential, meaning that until I make that shift from thinking about doing meditation every day to help me with anxiety, I'm not actually going to do the action that brings relief to my anxiety, if that makes sense. Sounds simple, but it's really not, especially if you're in your suffering or your challenge or your task. You may think that you're doing action and you're really not. And this is also part of, like, again, my personal clinical style is like this gentle challenging and questioning and transparency, which is 100% built on a strong rapport of trust. So unless you have that trust with someone, you can't ethically challenge them like that. And that's a very intuitive relational attachment approach. But for me, when I build those relationships, and that's really at the core for social work of direct practice, is building that relationship. And that relationship sets the foundation for you to explore challenging things with that person. But it also acts as this sort of bridge from, like, it's a container to practice things that you then go practice out in the world in your life. So in this juncture, this preparation to action is one of the most challenging things to try to encourage, guide, lead, empower someone to do. And I want you to start thinking about, I'm not going to say it now, why that is. What is it that prevents us from going from knowing you have a problem, wanting to change it, or a task, right, in education, knowing you have something to learn, knowing you have a change to make, you want to make the change, you're intent upon doing it, you even talked about how you're going to do it, but then actually taking the actual, action. I didn't want to say action 500 times, but there we are. So does that make sense? I want you to just jot that down. I want you to think about, why might that be so hard? And we see it all the time. Now, I heard you say self-actualization, Kelly. So here we are at Maslow, and I'm sure some of you have seen this before. This is another, not necessarily a framework that directly, like stages of change, relates to change, but I think is so important in thinking about how we as social workers frame the ability to make change. So speaking of things like inclusion, diversity, equity, big, huge, massive words that, I wish we could stop and unpack for 30 minutes, and we can't. But I want to point out that, a big part of social work is meeting someone where they are. So Maslow, basically from the social work lens, says certain kinds of change or self-development or self-actualization just isn't possible if you don't have things like if you don't hit these benchmarks that come before, these foundational things that make it possible for you to do something like work on your anger, anxiety, improve your relationships, do healthy risk, face healthy anxiety, going to a job interview, stating your needs, making boundaries. I mean, these are the kinds of things that it's not that they're not hard, it's just the good kind of hard. It's the work that you want to do. It's the hard work that we would encourage you to do as a social worker. But again, meeting people where they are. If someone comes into treatment or someone comes to work with me and they are homeless, and they have nowhere to live and they need medication that they don't have access to, there's no way that I can start working with them on something that would fall in self-actualization and self-development, right? You meet someone where they are. I like this model too, because it puts an emphasis on love and belonging and this idea of connection. Now, if you're an Esther Perel fan, which you all may or may not have heard of, I think she says something to the effect of like, the quality of our lives is directly related to the quality of our relationships. So for me as a relational therapist, someone with a teacher who believes in the relational approach, this aspect is really important. And I think it's extra hard to make change if you're doing it in a way where you feel isolated and that you won't be caught in some way by some system if you fall down in the attempt to make that change, right?
Beautiful, Christina. I just want to jump in for a moment. Again, here in the chat, I was suggesting, right? Think of the parallels here. What does it mean in ed to meet someone where they are, thinking about whatever age of learner? But also, we did an exercise prior to you coming, Christina, where we looked at this hierarchy of needs, recognizing that the goals of self-actualization, those needs aren't always listed in hierarchical form, right? But what would it mean to label or to identify or to depict our own hierarchy of needs? And I wonder here what for students, for example, if you engage them in an exercise of really mapping out what their needs were, right? How you as an educator might be able to better assist them because of your awareness, because of your cognizance of those needs. Just thinking about, again, parallels.
And again, with equity, and I think I'm stealing this from Allison, I'm sure, but equity is not, or 100 other people too, not my original thought. Equity is not equal sameness, right? So, for one student, they may have no problem with self-esteem. Oh, they feel great. They've got great confidence. They've got healthy primary caregiver relationships that have taught them that risk is secure and okay, and they're safe. That might not be at the top of their hire. That may not be something that they need first before they can do something risky in sense of learning, right? But someone else, maybe that's like number one. They have no self-esteem. They just have no ability to think that they can do anything new. And again, want you to keep thinking about what are the barriers that keep us from entering into that process. Rock and roll. Okay, where are we at now? Ooh, ecological systems theory, basic assumptions. So this is going to be a nice little partner to what we've just gone over. The basic assumptions of this framework and theory is human problems are accounted for by the complex interplay of psychological, social, economic, I misspelled that, political, and physical forces. Problems are not the result of individual pathology or failure. I don't like that word as a social worker, failure. I don't like it. That's why I put it in quotes. Challenges represent a malfunctioning ecosystem, maladaptive transactions, dynamics within the system. That was really a mouthful. What does that mean to you? Anyone? What does that mean in your words?
If there's a problem being presented, like if there's a quote unquote problem being presented by like a particular individual who's coming for help, or like a particular student in ed spaces, like part of looking for where the problem lies involves looking at the larger system, looking at the things that are not just in the individual.
Yes, thank you. So we're going to see this in a nice big image. Again, I don't so much worry about all these words. I'm going to speak them to you. Look at the image and just kind of take it in. So like we're just saying, this is very important to social work as a whole, to look at someone, person and environment, right? The pie, person in environment. And let me, oh no, go back. There we go. So change at one level, some assumptions for this model, change at one level affects all other levels. In education, you could think about that in the classroom, right? A change in one individual affects the system of the whole classroom. A change in you as the instructor affects the whole classroom. I remember coming in to run group sometimes, and I would say to them right before we started, to be transparent, I am at 50% today. For whatever reason, my dog was sick, or, and I don't want you to think that it's you. It's just me having not slept or something like that. And if I hadn't said that in the spirit of relationships and belonging and transparency, they may have internalized that shift in me. The whole system is thinking, oh, she's mad at us, or she doesn't want to be here. She doesn't care about us. I mean, that could really extend, far. So change at one level affects all other levels. Interconnectedness of life, development, and change. Social ecology, meaning who do we interact with? What's our routine in these different systems? How do we interact? That's very important. Person and environment. We do not function in isolation, but as part of many systems that impact our sense of self. In terms of something like inclusion and diversity, I like this because it works against, if some of you have read, and Kelly, this is really, I think we did this in your class too, but the characteristics of white supremacy, right, would say the person is the problem. You're the problem. And so an antidote to that is to say, actually, we need to look at people in environment. We need to look at people in all these interacting systems that influence how that person responds to life and walks around in their bodies every day. So this is one of those things that really social workers keep in mind in order to make sure that we're very grounded in social justice as well. That's a huge value of social work. But in this idea that we're never blaming the individual, we're never just getting that tight to just see the individual. We want to know about their family, and we want to know about how they grew up, what neighborhood they grew up in. We want to know about what's in their mesosystem, right? So this gets a little dicey, but I just really down here in this highlighted area, micro is our immediate social environments, our immediate relationships, direct interactions. Meso is the interaction between two or more of those systems, like family and school, right? So your kids and their family, that's micro system. Exo, settings that influence an individual, but that they're not directly a part of, like a parent's work. Macro is the very wide cultural patterns of larger society, laws, government, resources, all these kinds of stuff that kind of go in the big wider bubble. And I think something for education that's really sticks out to me for this is something like sustainable change. I think a lot of times, and we experience this too in social work, you may be so successful at implementing change, encouraging change with a student in the classroom, right? Because you're creating this microsystem intentionally. You're aware of, your own energy and how you come in the space. Maybe you're building relationships. Maybe you're doing certain behavior change plans, certain learning plans, individualized, and you see this great change in the classroom. But when they go home to their other interacting system, is it sustainable? Is it supported? Is it talked about? Or is it constantly dismantled every time they go home? And then you have to rebuild it every time they come to class. And so this idea, again, of it's not just the individual. Some students may go home and no one ever asks them about their day at school, or do they have homework? It doesn't help them with their homework. Doesn't, maybe it's a very traumatic environment, a very chaotic and consistent environment. All of those things interacting really to, again, be either a barrier or a positive enforcement aspect of change and how sustainable it is.
You just brought up a really nice tie there here, Christina, thinking about is that for different individuals, you may have those wider levels playing a more significant role than for others, right? So specifically in how vulnerable they are to systemic oppression and violence. So how vulnerable they are to the meso, the exo, the macro, being a place of vulnerability in particular.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And, I think I thought about it a lot as a clinician, and I'm sure it's something you all are thinking about in terms of education, that recognizing, again, equity is not sameness, all these systems, like how much weight is someone carrying when they walk into your classroom, and that weight is uneven and it is different for everyone. And I really like that you brought up that point. So thank you. So this isn't so much a framework and a model as it is just sort of something I wanted to throw in because I think it influences my idea of change in a large way, which is this sort of holistic approach. And it is woven into social work, sort of human behavior theory here and there, but I think typically it gets like a little footnote along with like sort of spirituality. And basically what we want to think of body, mind, emotions, and spirit, similar to this idea of systems, that there are many interconnected parts of an individual. And therefore, if we're thinking about change, many ways in which to create change, access change, inspire change, I like to say that there are many doorways, right? So for me, maybe like if someone tells me to change my thoughts, I just can't do it. Like I'm just not, it's not clicking for me. Maybe I have like perpetual negative thoughts about myself, and the cognitive approach of using, changing my thinking just isn't landing. But maybe exercise somehow is just the endorphins, just the physical movement of my body, again, changes movement, right? That's what I sort of landed on as I reflected on this for myself, is any movement is good movement. If we're talking about change, that would be where we're getting into my philosophy, right? Any movement is good movement. Movement is healing. Movement is change. Movement is, any shift. That's what we're looking for. That's what I'm personally looking for in clinical work or social work, is like, how do we get some movement in you, some shift inside that will help you make the shift on the outside that you're looking for, right? So could be the body, could be the mind, could be your feelings, could be just feeling the feeling is movement. And I'm sure all of you have felt or witnessed or seen in your loved ones when people resist feeling a feeling, and they try to keep it. You can almost see people like it gets stuck right here. Like they'll come up and then they'll be like, ugh, right? There's a resistance to the movement sometimes. And why that is, many reasons. And that's part of what you're thinking about. Could be fear. Oh my God, I can't feel this. I won't make it. Could be, I'll never come back from it. Could be, oh, if I really feel this, it's going to really hurt. Yes, it will hurt. But that's part of the movement, right? Part of the movement is the struggle, which now we're really getting into to how I feel about it. So we'll just skip ahead. So what does all this mean? All of this leads to the question, as I was doing my brainstorming, which I really enjoyed, by the way. So I'm so grateful, Kelly, that you asked me, those two kind of leading questions, which was, what are social work theories of change? And then what is your kind of philosophy of change, and how does that happen? How did it get there? And I actually had to really spend time to ask myself, like, what do I think of change? Like, I can't put that in a succinct sentence. It was a really good, fruitful exercise for myself. So all of this leads to this, kind of like, where does change start then? Mind, thoughts, emotions, behaviors, feelings, environment, conditioning, relationships, willpower, external, internal. So like, where does it start? Short answer, all of it, right? And that's, the simple answer. And now this is where I'm getting into like really my philosophy of change. In short, it is very, and this is at the bottom point here, accumulated, I think, from my own life experiences, which in social work we would call use of self. So, I'm bringing myself, there's always multiple people in the room when you have a classroom or you have a clinical session or you have a group. Like, I'm not invisible. Like, I bring myself to that room. Kelly, we talked about last semester, you teach who you are, right? Am I saying that right? I hope I remember that right. So this idea of, I bring myself, my own experiences of healing, my own perceptions and conditioning frameworks, and then I combine that with the knowledge learned of, social work school really gave me the language for the experiences that I had, and the framework and the places to organize all the things that I sort of like saw, witnessed, experienced, and had done already in the field. So my personal philosophy has really become this weaving of, again, personal experience and what I've learned, through the social work profession. And I just pick and choose and I borrow, and I am okay with that. And not everyone will be, but for my philosophy, and I think this is up here, there are many ways to change or heal. And my main aspect here is that it is always about finding the best fit for the individual or group or self at the particular point in time with the particular set of circumstances. If it is helpful for my client to color, we're going to color. If it's helpful for them to take a walk, and I think I put an example down here. I had a client once who had such intense depression that he would come to sessions and he would just sit quietly. And so the idea was like, how do I create movement in this person, right? If anything, depression is a fantastic example of lack of movement. Depression is something where we have low energy, we have a lack, we need to insert energy somehow. It can feel impossible for folks to get out of bed. It can feel heavy. It can feel, so thinking about movement changes movement. That's a task. But stuff like that, that very sort of relational, creative approach. We got back, we had coffee, we colored. So again, for me, I'm not going to be someone who says, I'm a CBT therapist, or I am a DBT therapist, or I am there as really a co-creator, right? To partner with this person or group to help them explore whatever makes the most sense to meet the moment they're in. And it's really important, I think, that we recognize that that's different for everyone. So all things belong. This is another piece. What we resist persists. So for me, my philosophy on change is that the challenges and emotions and reactions we are having are invitations for healing, change, or increased understanding. So Brené Brown has this great part of, I think, her talk on vulnerability, where she says, we can't, as humans, we often want to like feel joy and excitement and gratitude and connectivity, but we don't want to feel sadness or depression or anxiety or anger. And she's like, you can't numb the bad feelings without also numbing the good feelings. So you can't pick and choose. So change for me, and this is a lot influenced from my own experience, is so much about allowing and surrendering and building that self, through this kind of self-actualization. So here you see how I borrow this, this idea of like learning to trust myself to handle whatever that invitation is that has come to the surface. And so that's the work that really I try to do with clients is, building their ability to have that faith in themselves, to feel empowered in themselves, to meet their own moments, right? Whether I'm there or not. A big thing that always tends to happen is in treatment is that like if someone cries, everybody like runs to them. They want to like hug them and like, it's okay. And I would always be like, don't touch them. Let them experience this shift and feel and remember, learning's in the experiential, right? So let them experience that they can feel this very difficult emotion and survive it. And then that's going to teach them through this experience. Oh, well, I can do that again. Well, if it happens again, oh, maybe I can do this, right? So this sort of neuroplasticity concept, right? That the brain is malleable, that it's always can change. We can always build new pathways. Nothing is finite, nothing is concrete. And I think one of the reasons folks avoid or have trouble or don't make change is that idea that they think they are who they are. Well, I could never do that. I can't do that, right? So working through that thinking. We are always working towards wholeness, less about fixing, more about allowing. Internal exploration, I just kind of talked about that. Power of choice. So Carolyn, if you watch this video, I was telling Kelly, she's personally been like one of my most personal, profound sort of teachers in my life. And I wanted to give you something that wasn't necessarily by the book, because I knew I was going to orient you to these frameworks. So I wanted to just give you something that was, included some maybe less talked about things. And Carolyn, her whole, a lot of what she teaches is self-actualization, self-development. The whole talk was power of choice, right? And that can be, again, that can go head to head with some social work theories and frameworks where they might say, no, your job isn't to push like that. So again, I'm sort of showing my personal style, which is this sort of challenging, and is this gentle challenging with the partnership of the relationship. And I think, and you'll see here, change is always possible at any moment, while also understanding the significance and the influence of all the layers seen in all the frameworks that we just looked at. So, it's a paradox, like anything, right? So to me, anyone can heal at any moment, anything, it's possible. But that doesn't discount that it also lays parallel to all of the points we just said, and what is a barrier to that, and what makes that harder for some people than other people, and all of those things. But that coexists for me. And that's where this gets murky, because it's not as straightforward. And, if anyone came to me, I would never want them to think that what they were experiencing, they could not somehow find their way through, because I ultimately don't believe that. But also I meet them where they are. So you see where like a lot of these theories and frameworks and personal beliefs and use of self really start to sort of weave together. It reminds me too of some of the other theories we talked about, which is like helping someone to not see themselves as the problem. Which in my personal style is a lot about transparency. Like I hold no zero cards to my chest. Like I'm never like, I'm really thinking this, but I'm going to ask this question. Like I am so open and transparent. And I think that 99.9% of the time, folks appreciate that, and it builds the connection and makes them feel safer. Right. So with a student, if you are a teacher who has that relational approach and they've confided in you that their home environment is chaotic, like, I don't know what your thoughts are in this, but I guess because I'm a social worker, my instinct would be to be like, to point out to them, right? Like, I can see how that is really hard for you to go home and feel chaotic and then come here and have a different feeling. Like, what's that like for you? And that's probably, I guess, like a role of a counselor. Like, I don't know how you all feel about that. Like, is that your role? Is it not? Is it the counselor? Is it you? Are you both? Like, right? Teachers probably wear 100 hats, but, how sort of potentially healing is that for someone that they trust, that they see every day, that they feel safe with, to just see them and to just witness something true about their experience. And that's also very social work. Just that there's that, a lot of social workers in training, especially first years, so often are like, well, what if I don't do the right thing? What if I say the wrong thing? What do I do? What if I don't know how to be a therapist? And it's like, come back again and again and again to the truth that just witnessing is sometimes enough. Just that healing presence, just being present is oftentimes enough for someone to experience a shift for themselves. And it's often just enough to be seen or to have something difficult witnessed. Like, don't underestimate the power of just that. And that's very social work. That's very in my philosophy, but that's very social work, that like, you might not have to do anything else.
Yeah, I don't know if I've mentioned before, but Bob Keegan out of Harvard's Graduate School of Education, he offered this beautiful line, which has resonated with me and has been a touchstone about that education really, and I think here social work, this notion of the healing arts, right? About attention, the root word being tend or to hold, that it's about holding another person, holding space for another person, right? As educators, as counselors, as social workers, the power of just that holding, that witness, I think is a beautiful parallel. So yes. Christina, bring us to this, turn off our camera. I'm intrigued.
Okay, yeah. So we're gonna just do a little experience, and I'm doing this in part because of how I feel about my theory of change, but because I want you to, think broadly about what movement is, what change is, what healing is, and sort of, letting all of what we just talked about marinate a little, from the holistic approach with the mind and body, emotions and spirit, to, all the different things we talked about. And I just want you to tune in, another social work term. I would like you to turn your camera off, to close your eyes, to be present, turn your volume up, because I want you to hear this loudly, or if you have headphones, that might make you hear it louder. But I just really want you to do nothing but listen to the song and tune into yourself. And then as soon as it's done, we're going to take 2 or 3 minutes for you to jot down anything, any shift or movement that you felt. But right now, I just want you to have the experience and be present with it. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Here we go. Someone tell me if you can't hear.
We can hear it.
Okay, thanks. right. So go ahead while it's fresh. You can keep your camera off if you would like. Take 2 to 3 minutes and write down any wild, random, don't have to make sense notes about what movement you experience. Could be physical, could be emotional, could have been something you thought of while you were listening. Just anything. Use all your senses. Just take 2 to 3 minutes.